Hey everyone, welcome back to your favorite sales podcast. I'm your host, Ross Rich, and today we have a very special guest. We have Alli Sitkiewicz, the SVP of Sales at Built-in. Thank you so much for joining, Alli.
Hi, Ross. Thanks for having me.
Amazing. Well, before we dive into some of your top strategies for driving execution excellence, maybe so the audience gets to know you a bit, how did you stumble your way into revenue leadership in the world of sales?
Yeah, good question. Happy to kick us off. And thanks again for having me. I'll kind of go back actually starting at college. I went to school in journalism. My mom was a former sales exec. My dad was a business owner, and I had nowhere in my mind was sales in terms of profession. When I was a sophomore, I actually got a piece of paper on my desk in one of my classrooms that said, would you like to make $20,000 this summer? And I was like, yes, I was in college. $20,000 is a lot of money. And I went to a seminar and essentially got recruited to sell books door to door in college. The business I had worked for called Southwestern has been around since actually the 1850s. It was door to door sales selling educational books from early stage all the way up through college prep. That was more of my inception into sales in general, where essentially I went out to the East Coast and had a territory and knocked on doors, about 80 hours to 85 hours a week, Monday through Saturday. I bring it up because for me, it was very foundational in what I decided to do in my sales career. We had a week-long training program in Nashville where you just literally walked around with this script and rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. And for me, it allowed me to really understand, like, grow up quickly and understand sales fundamentals, which we'll talk about later in a bit.
Mhm.
But from there, when I graduated college, I felt like I had a little bit more ability to be picky with where I worked, given the experience I had for those 3 years.
Yeah.
I found a company right out of school that had similar qualities from training programs to good mentorship, good visibility to how I could grow. Found my first job out of school that was in sales at a staffing agency. And from there, maxed out kind of everything I could in terms of promotions, territories, to then landing a large account. And intrinsically, I always led towards helping other people. So I liked sales. I was motivated by that. And I felt myself always being like number 3 or 4 on the leaderboard versus one because I gravitated towards mentoring others, bringing
Mm,
them along for the journey.
yeah.
And one of the most foundational moments I remember is actually interviewing with my now boss of 9 years, where she had asked me what one of my areas of opportunity were in my role. And
Mhm.
I had shared that I'm always number 3 or 4. I'm not usually one. And I tend to gravitate towards what I just shared. And she had said in response, hey, I actually wouldn't call that a weakness. I would call that something that it's more environment and finding a place that brings that out.
Yeah.
So lo and behold, I found my now job built in. I am one of our first employees, so under 10 employees when I joined the business as an
Wow.
account executive, which is fun. A lot of iterations across that time, but started as an AE and then went from there to team lead and built out different teams from our AM team, our CSM team, our support team, and from manager to director to VP. And I think two call outs of what really made me love people leadership and all of this was getting to be a part of our Series C fundraise was one of the coolest learning experiences I've ever been a part of.
Mhm.
And lastly, just actually getting to build out these departments. So that's kind of the high level of how I've gotten here over these past, 15 years.
Totally. And I'm guessing a lot of people might have dropped out of that first experience of going door to door, right? Like a lot of people try sales and it's like, oh, it's this great profession. You can make a ton of money and have ownership in and blah, blah, blah. But like at the end of the day, a lot of people don't want to do it. Curious to get your take on going through that experience, seeing peers maybe, thrive or not. What do you think the kind of, your own characteristics led you to succeed in that and want to continue down the path relative to other folks who might have, gone into journalism from that experience and continued down that kind of different professional path.
Yeah, honestly, that was my most memorable moment. My first summer was on Sundays, is when everyone who did it across basically the state I was in, we all got together and we would like do these things to see who was at the top of the leaderboard, who was doing well, who was basically losing money in the job.
Yeah.
I remember having this moment of like, holy shit, all this is inputs. Like, can I do more inputs than my peers? And if I
Yeah.
can, in this exact situation, for every 30 doors, I would close one deal. My win rate got better as I improved. But
Yeah.
I'd say in response, like just that registration of like, if I put more in, I can get more out
Yeah.
was such a foundational point for me, which was also what made me decide to stay in sales because I was like, I can make more than my peers. Whereas in advertising, I could work just as hard and I got the same thing until a promotion. So that was
Yeah.
definitely like a very easy aha moment at the very beginning. Yeah,
It's funny because I think different people hearing that would have different conclusions, right? Like I hear that and you hear that and you're like, oh, that's amazing. I'm going to try to get better. I'm going to be more efficient. I'm going to work harder. That's amazing. I continue to move up and up. I think other people hear that and they're like, oh, that sounds like a lot of work. Why wouldn't I just do something where I can be part of a team and not have the pressure of those
totally.
inputs and outputs? Yeah.
Totally. I think everything it comes back to, and we'll talk about this within our strategies, but environment is everything, right? Like, and I think they made a great environment for the job for the right person, but not everyone's met for that environment or
Yes.
for the task. And literally, you're selling books by yourself all day. So, like, no one can force you to do that. So, anyway.
Totally. And so fast forward, many years of hitting quota and deals and all this kind of stuff to sales leadership. Um, what do you think the hardest part of that transition from being one of the top AEs and supporting others to now, only hitting quota through folks that you're leading and managing? What's the hardest part of that transition in that job?
So I think for me, what made it easier, real quick, was doing the job. So I do think someone that has done
Yes.
the job that your team is doing intrinsically makes you more relatable. Um, I think as a young sales leader, there's this expectation to like put on a more mature face
Mm,
and confidence. And I'm a pretty direct person that sometimes can come off maybe brash sometimes. And so I think that mixture of young leader who was taking their peers and now managing them,
yeah.
there's this balance of like not being overly confident or overly like unrelatable given that
Yeah.
change. So that was one of the hardest things. But over time, because my personality is much more of a builder, I found that as I added value to them and treated them more like humans and got to know them and didn't, try to act more like the manager per se in those early days,
Yeah.
definitely helped me get through there.
Yeah, there's definitely that, feels like you have to put on a mask going from that AE role, especially if you were with your old peers. I think I found that really hard in a past life when I went from AE to, more of a leadership role on a team. It's like, how do you reset those relationships? I think a lot of people's first experience going into management is with ex peers. And I think that's
Yes,
really,
yeah,
really challenging.
totally.
Amazing. Well, shifting gears a bit from kind of your journey to the three strategies for driving execution excellence. I love the first one here. We were just talking to Stevie over at the CRO at Vanta about this. Is
Yes.
control the controllables. So, what does that mean to you? And I guess it kind of ties back maybe a bit to your first days knocking on doors there.
It very much does. I think just to take a step back from when we were selling doors, we had
Yeah.
a very regimen routine from like literally 6 a.m. until I went to bed at 10 o'clock. So you had to take cold showers. You had to literally wake up, do push-ups, sit-ups, whatever you wanted to do. And then we'd have post-it notes all over our mirrors, like it's going to be a great day. You are amazing at your job. And all over my car. I mean, it's excessive, right? However, how it translated over and why to this day as a leader, I really do foundationally believe control the controllables is such an important part of this. I'll actually start with the mental. I think at work, we get so consumed with the work controllables. However, I fundamentally believe that the headspace that you are in really drives a lot of your outcomes. Which again in that job was so foundational for me. So
Yeah.
positive self-talk, like I find I struggle with it. Everyone does, right? Like the most you talk about is in your own head and not out loud,
Yes.
and it's usually negative. And
But it's
so,
reflected out loud. Yes, your internal is reflected
yes,
out. There's no faking it to you. Everyone can read that. Yes, this is such an important thing. I'm so glad we're talking about this because I feel like we're so activity focused and we never talk about who you are as a person. And that's what you're portraying every single day and every single interaction, right?
100%. And I'm very lucky that I learned that early on, and my parents actually really embody this and kind of ingrained this in me. But it's a full stop. Like the business side of it doesn't matter until this
No.
part is in a good spot. So couple things that like I will put post-it notes when my family went through a pretty hard my son went through some hard health issues a couple years ago, and I have post-it notes on my mirror that say you are a great parent, right? Like this too shall pass. And so it really starts at home and in your head, honestly. And so going back to control the controllables, are you talking to yourself positively? If something happens, do you shake it off or you bring it to the next call? Instead of bring it to the next call, like take a moment, take a breather, say something like have never been as good as your job as you are right now. Something that like helps you just kind of like recalibrate.
Totally. And when you're saying this, it's funny because I'm reflecting on this is something that I've personally obsessed over and been a journey, through, learning about, yoga and Buddhism and practicing for myself. But
Yeah.
honestly, I never bring this up with my team. And now I'm realizing, hey, maybe I should focus less on some of the tactical things with my team around how to do an on-site or how to ask this question a certain way. And a lot of that might just come from the tonality, and they can be more successful just from some of this inward stuff and teaching that, which feels very far from, I think, some of the usual sales strategy and tactics that we talk about on LinkedIn and on team meetings, right?
I honestly, Ross, if that's something you take from this, I've done my job in this because I
Yes, hopefully
really
others out there are also thinking the same way. Yeah.
yeah, I do believe it. My mom's a yoga instructor and a health coach, so again, it's very much ingrained in me that I get some benefits from it. But I will tell you, like one of sometimes I put my team in what makes them uncomfortable of like, do we meditate and do like a 1 minute of deep breathing? Do I start with a quote that helps like bring intention?
Mm,
Another thing that I've been actually some of my team and I are working on right now is like instead of thinking about all the things that could go wrong when we're at the end of the quarter and there's so many balls in the air, like ask yourself like what could go right, how many things could go right, like if you
yeah.
manifest it it'll happen. So a couple last things, I do love certain tools. Every time I go into my browser on my computer I use that momentum dash that has like a quote every day that I love. I love yoga, as you just mentioned. I also just found this app called Soak that is all about frequencies. And so
Mm.
it's just fascinating and it helps whether it be anxiety or trying to actually bring higher energy. So anyway, controllables, we can talk about the professional side next, but to me, like
Yeah.
it all starts here.
Totally. No, I'm so glad that we touched on this and kind of went down this path because again, I think it's something that a lot of people might be working on themselves and might not feel the confidence or comfortable bringing to their team. And I think, this conversation kind of, is a good reminder for myself and hopefully other folks out there to think about, hey, can you help teach someone a routine that maybe they'll take into the rest of their life? And, when you think about when people have their ups and downs, top performers, I think usually I've noticed they have their downs. It's not related to the professional life. It's something going on personally.
Yeah.
So then why
Yeah.
couldn't that be the same for everyone else? And how do you work on, helping them in a way that makes sense? Obviously you don't want to, obsess over someone's personal life as a direct report or something, but kind of teaching them these things, I think could be really helpful.
Another quick one, like the
Yeah.
scrolling, right? Like cut your social media for the week, right? So like that's something when especially when the market was going crazy or COVID stuff, like just having a conversation of guys like, does anyone want to test just like not being on social media from Monday to Friday? And let's see how it goes. So anyway, just another one that I've seen come up.
I love that. Well, maybe shifting gears to some of the more boring pieces of controlling the controllables and the professional side. How do you think about that, um, for your sellers?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first is just like the textbook, right? So like what a rep wants to hear, like what are the actual outputs, inputs I need to do to get the output. So number of activities, number of calls, like the pretty basic, right?
Yeah.
Your sales velocity around your win rates, your ACV. So I think those are pretty common.
Yeah.
I think a couple things though I do want to just hit on is I think lately the market has been so different that the amount of outputs you had to do 3 years ago versus what you have to do today is changing.
Yes.
And I fundamentally have a problem with like activity for the sake of activity, mass blasting for the sake of mass blasting. And so I am always preaching to my team that yes, there is the basics that we just
Yes.
know.
Yeah, you need to
However,
meet with people. You need to send emails to get deals done. Yes, there's a foundational thing that some people aren't at the level to even be successful. So yeah, there is that
yes,
part that is important, and totally don't, debase activities as a non-important thing for sure.
yes, yes. And if it takes you 300 activities to get one meeting, like, well, then maybe let's rethink what you could do in a different way. And so, for example, like,
Yeah.
how do you use your leadership team and have them do more personal outreach? And so, I'm very big on yes, there is a foundation that you always need to reflect on of how you could just be improving the foundation and your sales velocity.
Yeah.
And always revisit it, like get creative. And then the one other one on the customer side, so retention and churn is a big one for us. One of our member of my sales team, I loved her asking this question because I say this control the controllables. And she was like, what do you mean by that? Which I really respected her saying that because some people might feel like they don't know what's in their control right now. And so the one other thing in terms of retention is just looking at your top churn reasons and understanding what the controllable improvements are within those churn reasons. So something like a business going out, a company going out of business is not in your control, but something that is maybe led with a new contact getting involved into the sales process or them not fully understanding or adopting the value of the product. So that's just another very specific example that we see a lot of value in honing in on top churn reasons, controllables within that. That way, like, I mean, that is a sizable amount of revenue we could chip away at not losing if we are to focus on that.
Totally, totally. Any recent super specific examples you can think about from your team for that?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, one of our hardest churn, like one of the main reasons for churn is our change in decision makers. So,
Yeah,
contact purchases the investment, they leave halfway or they get removed, right?
yeah,
So, we did a whole exercise for the past 6 months on how do you, at minimum, add value to that executive sponsor that no longer is involved.
yeah,
Or if the
yeah,
person is gone, what's your plan of attack of re-onboarding some new contacts?
yeah.
Would be one of the other one that is bigger and goes into a different conversation. But as the market changes, your value prop, the industry, right? Like there's a lot of significant trainings on just leveling up why our solution is valuable and how it plays into their pain. So that's an
Yes.
ongoing controllable I see improvement on that right now we're consciously putting a lot of focus on. And it's already worked once you just make a very narrow focus.
Yeah, and I think it's something again I've found I take for granted sometimes. Like if you're thinking about that yourself as a leader, or you're talking about with a leadership team, there's kind of this curse of knowledge, and we talk a lot about it at Accord, where hey, just because we obsess over these things, does the rest of the team have the same visibility, and could it be newer for them? And we take for granted our lens relative to the field's lens with a lot of those changes in the market.
Totally. And we'll talk about that later with just one of the other things that I find really valuable around like operating, because at the end of the day, like we have to make sure that message goes down correctly so that they do understand that.
Yeah, well, maybe that's a good transition. We'll come back to the to number two, investing in high performance and high potentials, and let's shift over to how you think about building an operating cadence and why that's so important for execution excellence.
Yeah. So one thing I'm very big into like behavioral assessments, anything where I can understand like my strengths, my weaknesses. And I think this one is a big one for me specifically because I move quickly. And what I tend to know based off my personality is that sometimes I don't do the best job of bringing people along the way.
Yes,
Can't
that
imagine I'm
resonates.
alone in that.
For a lot of sales leaders out there, might have a similar personality. Yeah.
Oh, patience is not my strong suit. And I think people can read my mind. But so when I think about feedback over the years, what I always see as a trend is when things are breaking or I get feedback of, hey, we don't feel in the loop on this, we don't feel informed, we're not sure what's driving this. I have found that it's when our operating cadence is off. And so I love this analogy, and I can't remember who shared this with me, but the whole idea was that philosophically, any relationship you have from your boss, your spouse, your vendor, anything, the number one thing everyone wants in their relationship or partnership is predictability. Like you want to feel safe. You want to feel like you know what's coming. No one wants to, I'm sure you don't want to just feel caught off
Hate
guard, right?
surprises. That's like my number one thing when I talk to people who work with me is like the number one thing. I don't mind bad news, good news, whatever. I just don't like surprises, and I'm sure I'm not unique in that.
Not at all. And I thought that was fascinating that if you think about it, we all have a common goal with any relationship we have, which is predictability. And when I married that with the fact that I don't even have a consistent schedule that I'll know when I'll have an update on certain things or alignment on, I can only imagine how that feels for my team. And so, finding a way to create an operating rhythm. And what I mean by that is like, do you have a predictable schedule of when you as revenue leaders meet on a certain cadence, when you meet with as a group, your marketing counterpart, your product counterpart, and how that can help with, let's say, my managers is anytime they flag something to me, like, great, let me add that to this agenda that's already on the calendar versus it being a constant recreating of the wheel, I have found that to help a lot.
Totally. And that's something that I think, especially for startups, and you talked about being a builder and obviously, built in going from you being one of the first people there to scaling the business is really hard to balance because you can't always hold every meeting. You can't always be super rigorous or like a larger business. So how do you think about balancing the, hey, there's a deal we need to close or a candidate I need to, talk to and potentially canceling or shifting around those meetings? How do you think about that tough balancing act?
That might be actually one of the biggest challenges of this job, right? It's wild if you think about going from a customer call to an internal strategy call to a one-on-one to a, it's wild.
Yes.
I am really big on prep, which I think goes into this same thing of operating cadence. Like, do I
Yeah.
have an agenda for this meeting? If there's no agenda, I'm not like this meeting should not happen, right?
Yeah.
So I think in order to be at that same caliber to go into every meeting present, knowing what you're walking into that meeting to, and if there is no agenda, cancel the meeting, right?
Yeah.
Is my biggest thing personally.
Yeah. And tying this back to what we were talking about before, it sounds like a big theme here in terms of the operating cadence and why it's important is the intentionality. It's not just doing things, it's the why behind it. And maybe that helps guide you in terms of priority shifting. Okay, is this the most important thing? Yes, we have this on the schedule, but what's the why behind it?
Totally.
Can we maybe drop this right now for these people because they're, or vice versa? Hey, we can't, even though we have this key deal, like this person's really struggling. This is going to have more of an impact in this quarter next. So it sounds like, yeah, that's a really key part of it.
Yeah, I think in general, like, I think when I say this to when we talk about this topic, people get afraid that it means more meetings. And I actually have found that if you
Yes,
have better alignment and reoccurring with agendas and with intentionality, you actually decrease the amount of meetings. So that also probably plays into this. And to your question of how do you balance it all, I actually find that I have less meetings when I can have this type of productivity versus all these one-off conversations that end up making me lose my mind, maybe.
totally, totally. Is there a particular type of meeting that you feel like is the most important for driving that alignment and that predictability across those relationships? Like, was there something that you might have not been doing before that as soon as you started, you're like, oh, this is like, incredibly obvious that we always should have been doing this thing.
Yeah, I would say two things. So, we have a weekly commercial alignment. So for us, that would be anyone that's a director or VP within our revenue org. And we meet every week and we have someone that steers the agenda. And during the week, we'll send her what those topics are to make sure that like we're all talking about the same thing in silos. Let's get aligned.
Yeah.
And what I also like about that is depending on the topic, we will then pull in marketing, we'll pull in our CFO, we'll pull in product. So I love that one, and it saves me having five siloed conversations.
Yeah.
So that's one. The other one that does sound obvious is a monthly product and revenue alignment. And it's massive kudos to our head of go to market strategy, but they basically take all of our product feedback and put data behind it to say, like, what are our customers asking for? And product shows the roadmap of what's coming up this month, next month, and then what's on deck.
Yeah.
And we do it monthly. And I love it. And then that cascades down to our product enablement trainings. So those would be the two that come to mind for me.
Awesome. Yeah. It sounds like it also, yeah, like you said, having those set meetings and driving them consistently maybe takes away something in between stuff. So net, if you do it right, you actually are meeting less, which is why I don't agree with the whole like let's not do meetings things because I think again you have more of that misalignment. When some companies like Shopify's of the world are like, oh, we're going to get away with meetings. Like I don't think that is the answer. Just doing it effectively is I think the key.
Yeah, I think of like a really quick example, like when your sales team is like, "Hey, I feel like I've been in the dark on like these new products being
Yeah,
released," right? I can literally go to my calendar and say, "Okay, I know that we're meeting as a leadership team with product next Tuesday, and I know that the sales team has an enablement training next Thursday." Okay, so like I hear you feel that. I'll put that in the agenda, and I know that this is going to be covered for you in the next 10 days.
totally. Yeah. Super important. But hard to do because yes, you're balancing also as a startup like deals and individual reps and all this kind of stuff, which is maybe a
Of
good
course.
last segue to topic three, which is investing in your high performers and high potentials. Now, okay, so you're, controlling the controllables, you have a great operating cadence. Now, how do you think about your team and how to, who to spend time with? Because you always have way too much to do. How do you think about, why you're high performers and high potentials? And what do
Yeah,
you
I
do with the
think.
rest?
Oh, good. Yeah, what do you do with the rest? That might be a whole other meeting on how you up level them or help them understand what they should be doing.
Yeah.
I think the first thing would be like making sure after you think about the controllables, identify the core attributes of your top performers. Like if I was new to a job, that would be the very first thing I would do is look at my top performer and like what makes them good.
Yeah.
Um, I've done this a few times over the past even few years as we've restructured. And one of the two things that I have seen come out very clearly is being coachable, but then based off how much things are changing lately, also being able to adapt. And adapting is not for everyone. There was an awesome quote I heard from John McMahon on a different podcast where he shared that like you could be a great person in one stage of a company and become a dinosaur when you get to the next stage, right? And in the stage we're at as business, I need people that are very quickly able to adapt. If I don't give them the tools to adapt, that's on me and
Yeah.
other people. But that's like level setting. It's just even identify what good looks like. And I honestly can't see a world where a company wouldn't want to see someone who's coachable and adaptable.
Yeah. Um, and that's interesting. So how do you think you've been able to go through the different levels of, built-ins growth, right? So you started super small. What do you think those traits that you had outside of just adaptability, um, lead someone to being able to be successful in multiple stages? Because there is so much, you can say that, oh, people change, blah, 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 but like, or you need different people, but like you lose so much context and tribal knowledge and the culture that's so important to effectively have. And I saw this at Stripe, like a lot of people stayed, like myself, 5 years plus. And the company changed a lot. I think it's really important to, not just for the relationship with customers, but the internal new people joining to feel that predictability and the culture. What do you
Yeah.
think separates the people that are able to stay at a place and find, new ways of being successful to the folks that need to maybe jump ship after a year or two or three?
So I think first and foremost, leading with solutions. It's just, at least for our company, we move way too quickly that if you don't lead with solutions, you're going to drown, right? So leading with solutions. But I think for me personally, two traits that I've found over time is what makes me successful is taking a step back to understand the current landscape. Like it changes so quickly. So the message I
Yeah.
was forcing 2 months ago might not be relevant anymore. And so for me to be able to consistently understand what's driving current state and what challenges we're facing. And if I was in a rep's shoes, if I'm a little isolated from that, I could see how like you don't have that connectivity, you don't understand some of those environment changes that I would want them to seek to understand so that they can stay close to what's going on. And then the
Yeah.
last thing I would say is, and this is more from a leadership standpoint, I think gaining buy-in along the way constantly is my personal superpower. So I drive people too hard that if I didn't have everyone's understanding of why, and I mean that
Mm.
cross-functionally, like
Yeah.
why does the CFO think like, why am I bothering her team so much, right? Or why am I hounding this team? Like I want them to understand why,
Yeah.
because once they understand it, they're always in, right? Like I'm yet to have anyone be like, absolutely not, Alli, right? So
It's
I'd say
usually the
that,
context, right? It's usually
yes,
all just most disagreements and all this stuff, especially at work, right? Usually comes from a misalignment of information, right? The lack of context.
exactly. Exactly. And I think I empathize with, let's say, a CFO who, if they have multiple stakeholders and if we'll all have mixed messages, like that isn't going to work out well, right? So I do think getting that alignment, getting everyone is on the same playing field of the same context that we're all working off of, I have found that's when I am the most successful in elevating myself.
Totally. And easier said than done, right? Because yeah, we're all moving a million miles an hour, and how do you have the in between time? And yeah, that's what I find personally really challenging.
No, totally. I mean, again, and patience isn't my strong suit. However, I tend to find that when people have the same context, we all have the same vision, the same goal, right? And
Yeah,
people are really reasonable about it. And so I think it's just making sure that we're all reading off the same song sheet or, whatever that analogy might be.
totally, totally. And yeah, when it comes to those high performers or high potential folks, what are some of the things when you think about motivating a larger team of AEs that you found to be some of the silver bullets, right? Is it the
Yeah.
leaderboards? Is it, celebrating the top performers? Like, what do you think some of those things that just would work across different teams that folks maybe might not be doing themselves out there?
So I actually think it depends on the person. And so my biggest like actual like tangible recommendation I have is we do something called stay interviews, and I do skip levels, meaning someone that doesn't report to me directly, having some type of cadence with them. And one of the main questions I usually ask is like, if you were to leave, what would be the top 1 to 3 reasons that you would like consider leaving, right? Or if you think about what drives you in order of priority, what would that be? Um,
Interesting.
and I think that's important because to someone, number one might be recognition, two might be pay, three might be flexibility. And the next person, it might be pay, 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 and then flexibility, right? So I think,
Yeah.
but that's one thing that you could put in easily without any tools or anything. It's just ask that question in a safe
Yeah.
environment. I would say also, I'm a very big, I mentioned this behavioral assessment. We use
Yeah.
a tool called Culture Index, but I'm very big on trying to find people's strengths and then lean into them. So why that's relevant for this is some people are motivated to do like independent work. Some people are motivated by collaborating with others and talking out loud. Some people like
Yeah.
to process internally and they'll come to you when they have their final like thing they want you to react to, right? Some people like no direction. Some people want a ton of direction,
Yeah.
right? So I think going back to your question of like, how do you make great people even better? I don't think there's a one size fits all. And I think you should consider a simple question like what I asked around asking them what motivates them. But
Yeah.
there's also tools that can help you really understand how to bring out their strengths, which to me makes you a much more powerful leader because you know who to lean into for what that brings out what makes them feel powerful, and in a way that might bring the whole group, elevate them too.
Interesting. Yeah. I always personally find it really hard to use some of those like person. I'm always like, okay, then what? It's like, okay, this person's this type of person. I'm this type of person. Like, and then live in those one-on-ones and other meetings, like really use that information. So yeah, do you have a couple examples of how you've done that in the past?
Oh, totally. So again, the tool that we use, we do have a consultant that helps me like real time, like go into a lot of scenarios, which is extremely valuable. Like, so
Yes.
what one of my most valuable, I'm annoyingly talk about this service, but one quick example. So there are certain salespeople that the more info they have, the stronger of knowledge they have on the product, they're like deadly salespeople, right? So their confidence comes from their
Yeah.
knowledge. Then you have the salesperson who runs through walls just because they have this like crazy sense of confidence and they just want to go try it, right? And
Yeah.
so if we have a new pitch, and a new product per se, the person that needs all that knowledge could actually really fall back during that change management. And so what I have found is that the people that are the strongest product experts, and that's where their confidence comes from, I like to lean into them in like the beta stages. So like have them poke holes in the product because they're going to
Got it.
find things that the person that's not detail oriented even doesn't care about. And
Yeah.
then by the time you get to pitching and training the product, you actually have someone who's already can speak for you. So I don't have to be the one to talk about this. I have someone on the ground that's advocating for it. So that's like
Interesting.
one example.
No, yeah, and that really resonates because we think about our training with the cord, and uh, we always want the detail-oriented person at the company that we're launching at speaking for us, and it's probably the same as a leader, right? Like the social capital they're going to have as a rep saying, "Hey, this is going to help us in these ways," versus even the manager that has different, obviously, motivations and everything. Yeah, that's a great example.
There's the term leaders go first, and I think of it as like the most senior or more the highest performers getting to react to something first. I find that
Yes,
they don't want to hear from me. They want to hear from their peers.
yes,
So, so if you have the personality that is the most dominant in the room and most opinionated, or the person that is really strong on the detail and the product, if you get a mix of both of those to be able to advocate for this on your behalf,
yeah,
and to be clear, find the holes because I have missed things and they can find that much better than I could.
yeah,
It's a much easier process, and it actually gains their experience, helps them get up running on this new thing as well.
yeah. No, that's a great example to round things out here. So yeah, as a quick recap, Ali, yeah, we hit on controlling the controllables and went down a really interesting path. I think not just the professional side, but personally, because yeah, the tonality, everything, we could be really good at pitching the product, knowing the features, personas, whatever. But if it doesn't ring true at that kind of tonality, emotional level, you're not going to be successful both as a seller, but also with your team, especially if you're driving forward a team. We talked about
Absolutely.
operating cadences, and sometimes having structured meetings and that predictability actually cuts down on some of the in-between work. It helps you move faster. And then they had a last piece about how to think about investing in your high performers and high potential folks. So this was, yeah, I have so many things to think about now, Ali, after this meeting, and hopefully others that are listening in do the same. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to share this with us.
Absolutely. Wish we had more time, but thank you, Ross. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you so much.